Welcome, everybody, to your free GMAT Prep Hour. It is November 6th, 2023. My name is Reed Arnold. I will be your host through the wonderful world of the GMAT today. If you are looking for other free prep options, we have many for you. You can take the first class of any of our main GMAT course for free, no questions asked. I always tell people you might as well do it even if you have no intention of signing up, just because we talk about some really big stuff in that first session, and you might as well take advantage of a free class. You can also try a sample of our Interact, which is our self-paced video course. Similar thing, you get some free stuff. You might as well take it. We also have free Foundations of Math workshops happening twice a month, sometimes even more. I think in December we're doing 4. We have 2 of those sessions. One is on computations, which is more like arithmetic and actually like calculating numbers, along with fraction, percent, and decimal mechanics. There's also the variable session, which is a little bit more focused on algebra and dealing with unknown numbers and how to think about those. It does not matter which order you take those in. They are meant to be in communication with each other, but they do stand alone. So take whichever ones you want to attend. We'd love to see you there. Today, in this free prep hour, of course, also, we have free prep hours. We have a whole library full of free prep hours that you have access to. You have basically a full GMAT syllabus available to you. That will be changing a little bit soon because the GMAT is changing, which brings us to today's topic. Today, we are talking about logic-based data sufficiency. So you may or may not know that the GMAT is going through its biggest change probably since it first went on computers, is my guess, before I started teaching it. There are many ways that this new test will change. A lot of the core stuff is still the same, the core skills, the core strategies. There's a lot that's similar. So don't think that this is a huge, drastically whole brand new test. But there are some differences and some significant differences. They've been written about on our blog. We'll be talking about them more and more. Keep seeking out resources for that. But one of the big changes in the quant section is that data sufficiency, one of the quant question types, will now have questions that are not quant. They will just be logic-based questions. So you won't have to do quantitative reasoning. You'll have to do logical reasoning, which, I don't know, depends on your proclivities. If you prefer quant, this is a bit of a bummer. If you kind of hate math, you might prefer logic-based data sufficiency. Either way, it's a new animal. And so I figured we might as well have a session on it early as this test rolls out. It's rolling out this month, and by the end of January, I believe, January of next year, the current version of the GMAT will be retired. And this will be the norm moving forward. And so since this is a pretty big change, I wanted to take some time today to introduce logical-based data sufficiency and demonstrate how, yes, it is different, but also some of the core skills that we've harped on for years and years and years still very much apply to this question type. First off, the basic format of data sufficiency remains unchanged. There will always be a question up top where it kind of lays out the situation. It might give you some information. And ultimately, it's going to ask you a question that you are ostensibly trying to answer. You will then get 2 statements that add information to the situation at hand. These statements will be relevant. They will be useful in some way, usually. They will not be dishonest. They are not trying to trick you. Well, I don't know if not trying to trick you, that might not be the right way to phrase it, but they're definitely not trying to lie. They give you the truth for that problem, for that scenario. So you never want to doubt these statements or wonder if they are not true. They also do not contradict each other. They are consistent. Something in statement 1 has to be possible in statement 2, and something in statement 2 has to be possible in statement 1. Okay, so they must be consistent with each other. And then there are these 5 answer choices, and these 5 answer choices will be in the same order. They never change. Now, you might notice that these answers don't answer the question, right? If the question asks how many of these employees were senior managers, how does answer A answer that question? Well, the fact is that the goal of data sufficiency, for those of you that have been studying for a while, you know this, but for those of you that are somewhat new, we have to make clear early on how this works. The goal of data sufficiency is less to answer the question and more to say whether there is enough information to answer the question. You are trying to say if you have enough. That's what sufficient means. If it's sufficient, it means it's enough to answer the question. So theoretically, you don't have to have an answer. You have to know if there's enough information to get one single answer to the question that is asked. Now, some students go a little bit too far with this and never answer the question. You will still often get to the exact answer to the question, but that's not technically the goal. It's whether there is enough information to answer the question. And these answer choices cover all the possible situations with these statements regarding sufficiency. Answer choice A says that statement 1 gives you enough information to answer the question, but statement 2 does not. Answer B says that statement 2 gives enough to answer the question, but statement 1 does not. Answer C says you need both of these statements together, but neither one alone is enough. And that's an important distinction. Yeah, it's important to note that C specifies neither statement alone is enough. Answer choice D says each statement on its own gives enough information to answer the question. And answer E says that, there's actually not enough information to answer the question that is asked. And I want to be clear here. Answer choice E is not, I don't know. Answer choice E is not, I don't know how this information could get me to an answer. Answer choice E says, I know that this information isn't enough to get me to an answer. That's a subtle different thing, but don't choose E just because you're unsure. In fact, in general, uncertainty often means they're hiding sufficiency in a really sneaky way. So just because you don't know whether a statement leads to an answer doesn't mean you should say it's insufficient. In fact, in general, as one thing we'll reemphasize today, your goal should be to prove insufficiency for a statement. And if you don't do that, kind of presume it is sufficient. That's a safer guessing strategy. We do have a way to memorize these answer choices called 12-10. 1, 2, TEN. That stands for 1 alone, 2 alone, together, each alone, and then not enough. There's not enough information to answer this question. Keep those in mind. So today we are going to do some data sufficiency questions that have this format, but this sample problem that we've used for years and years is math, right? It deals with percents, it deals with arithmetic. You can set up some equations, do kind of some high school math thinking with this. And these questions are still around. It's not that these questions are leaving, it's just that other questions are also coming into play, and we're going to be talking about those other kinds of questions today. If you are curious, the answer to this question is C. You would need both of these statements together to answer the question, how many employees were senior managers? All right, so without further ado, let's dive into this game and talk about some logic-based data sufficiency and how we can use old processes and strategies to move through these questions as well. Take 2 minutes to attempt this data sufficiency question, and we will talk. That is 2 minutes. If you have an answer, please send it to me in private chat. I'm just curious to see how we shook out on this one. You do still have a 2-minute answer, 2-minute pace for data efficiency questions. That remains the same. You generally don't want to go longer than 2.5 minutes if you miss. And in general, 3 minutes is kind of just too long, cut and run. So I'm seeing a lot of E's in the answer choices, and I think you all are going to end up being happy with that answer. Let's talk about how we got to answer choice E, and some ways we can use old processes for data efficiency that still apply even in this new kind of question. So previously, if you've done some studying on the GMAT, you might remember that there were two major kinds of data sufficiency questions. Questions that asked for a value, where you needed one specific number to count as sufficiency, and questions that ask yes, no. Logic data sufficiency brings in a third kind of question, choose one, where honestly, to me, it feels very similar to a value question. It's just that the value isn't a number. So maybe that's a silly thing to say, but it's just, if the question here is not a number, but there's one specific answer that would count as sufficient. If we can say one person who's on Monica's team, we are able to say sufficiency. If there are two possible people or more who could be on Monica's team, we would have to say insufficient. All right. There are 4 pre-statement steps that I think very much still apply to data sufficiency. Step 1 is what is given. I'm going to specify what is given. So here we have 6 employees, M, N, O, P, Q, and R. And yeah, I'm going to use abbreviations here. They're going to be paired off into 3 teams of 2. So I have these six people. I'm going to put into 3 teams of 2, and I want to know who's on Monica's team. So Monica is going to be on teams with what person? That is step 2 of every pre-statement step. What is asked? And then the third step is to specify what kind of question it is. Is it value? Yes, no. Or choose one, which again is very similar to me as value. Right? Am I looking for one specific answer, or am I saying yes or no to a question? It also helps now, since this is a new question type, it is a new question type. It helps to diagnose, is this going to be math or is this logic, right? That's maybe a new step to kind of slip in here. You could do it as part of the givens phase or part of the asked phase, but I think it helps to recognize, like, okay, this is not really math. Yeah, there are some numbers here, 3 teams of 2, but it's not going to be a math problem, a math situation. We are just going to be doing some logic. The 4th step I'm going to save for a moment, because it's not so pertinent on this question. We'll talk about why. To be shown soon. For this problem, these are kind of the first 3 things you would do, and then you would move to the statements. And just as before, take these statements one at a time. That's how we suggested you go through data efficiency previously. That's still going to be essentially true. You don't want to jump too quickly to analyzing both statements at the same time or smush them together. You might read them both sometimes, but usually you're just going to take statement 1 on its own and just consider if it's enough for this question. So we are told that O and Q are on a team. So O and Q are together. Do I know who is on Monica's team? Well, if O and Q are together, we can put O and Q together. Monica could then be with, well, R or N. And the other 2, I could put it out if I wanted to. I could fully test this out, right? It's OQ, MR, PN in this case, and PR in this case. If you want to write the full case, you can. But honestly, once these 2 answers come up, these 2 possible pairs for Monica's partner, oh goodness, I have proven insufficiency. I can come up with 2 situations where Monica has a different teammate, and they're both allowed. And this is standard old testing cases. This process that I emphasized in many other videos, if you know anything about me, you've seen me talk about testing cases. This process persists into logic-based data sufficiency. And testing cases, the goal of testing cases is to find two different situations that follow all rules, but have different answers to the question. Two different cases, two different situations that follow all the rules, but give different answers to the question. And that's what we have here. We follow the rules because O and Q are on a team in both cases. But we have a different partner for M. And so that's insufficient. And just as before, when statement one is insufficient on its own, we can get rid of answer choices A and D. Use your elimination grid. That process remains. So we move to statement two to analyze it on its own. Nina and Riley are not on a team together. So I cannot have Nina with Riley. And notice I'm doing a little circles and shapes and visual representations. With practice, you'll come up with a system that works for you, but you want to have kind of a system so you don't have to write every word of every data sufficiency problem. Now, here's another tip for testing cases that persists. Is a habit I used to emphasize. It's a habit that still works. Tip: if you can reuse or slightly tweak cases you've already used, do so. And so that's kind of the first thing I'm going to look at is the cases I've already tested to see if I can just reuse them for a situation. And in this case, I'm going to see that I can. In my cases before, I actually never put N and R on the same team. In the cases I presented there, I didn't put N and R on the same team. And so I already know that statement two is not sufficient because the same cases can work that I used in statement one. And so I can say that statement two is not sufficient and get rid of answer choice B. And since I've already, what is going on with Zoom here? My gosh. And since I have picked cases that work for both statements, I know the two together are not sufficient because the statements I chose for statement one, the cases I chose for statement one apply to both statements. They apply when the two are together. And so I can immediately say that the answer is E. There's not enough information to answer this question. Okay. So I've tested cases, I followed the rules in both situations, and when the two are together, I got different answers to the question. And if I'm a little strategic, I don't have to keep writing new cases. I can just use the ones I've already written up. Now, when I originally did this question, just so you all know, and I did this because I did it on scratch paper here just to go through the process again, I actually didn't use these cases. I actually used my cases for statement one were O and Q, and then I put M with P, and then I put N and R together on statement one. And then I was like, well, I can switch P and N, so that's insufficient. So I got rid of statement one. Then I went to statement two and it said N and R are not on the same team. And I still looked back at the cases I made and I realized, well, you know, I put P and N up there. I could have put R and N. So let's just put R there and then P here. So yeah, R and N are not on the same team in either case. And I get different answers to the question again. And so that was a good example of me actually slightly tweaking a case. Instead of starting from scratch, I slightly tweaked a case to fit the new rule. But I didn't have to start from nothing because I kind of realized that, well, okay, P and R on statement one, they're really the same. They have the same restraints, which is none. And so let's just switch P with R and I can use them for statement two now. Okay, so reuse cases, slightly tweak cases. Don't feel like you need to invent everything from scratch every time because that can be stressful. Okay. So that is a kind of crash course introduction. Again, a lot of this stuff still applies. Can I answer any questions before we move to a second problem? All right. In that case, let's try problem number 2. Take 2 minutes. Send an answer over chat when you have one. That is 2 minutes. Go ahead and send an answer. So I have here BACCC. So C's coming in with some gravity in the room. So let's talk. Same as before, step 1. Pre-statement steps. Step 1, what is given? So here I have 3 actors, Jennifer, Denzel, and Ben, and they're sitting in a row in that order. Jennifer, Denzel, and Ben, so I just write them in that order, left to right. And it says that Jennifer has won an Oscar, and I want to know, then there's step 2, what is asked. So I put a little O under Jennifer for won an Oscar. Now there's the question, what is asked? And that question that is asked is, is there an Oscar next to, let's put in meaning for not an Oscar. And so I want to know if someone with an O is sitting next to someone with an N, or if someone with an N is sitting next to someone with an O. That's the question that is asked. And step 3, is it value yes, no, or state 1? Here it is a yes, no question. Notice this is different from the problem before. The question before was asking you to specify 1. This is a yes, no. Either someone is sitting next to someone without an Oscar, or no. No one with an Oscar is sitting next to someone without an Oscar. Again, we're going to come back to step 4 shortly. And this question that actually will be useful to do step 4, but I'm going to show you that you don't have to do step 4 on this problem to get it right. Statement 1 tells me that Denzel has won an Oscar. And so I'm going to say, okay, now I know it's OO, and Ben could have won an Oscar. And then the answer would be no. No one with an Oscar is sitting next to someone without an Oscar. Or the answer could be, I'm sorry, Ben could have won the Oscar, and the answer to the question is no. Or Ben could have not won an Oscar, and the answer to the question is yes. because then we have Denzel next to Ben. We have an Oscar next to a not Oscar winner. Now, I'm going to specify something that I call doom logic. Doom logic is just to say we don't know about Ben. If you look at statement one and you're like, yeah, we don't know about Ben, therefore insufficient. You happen to be right in this case. Not knowing about Ben in this case is not sufficient, leads to insufficiency. But I still highly, highly, highly recommend proving your intuitions right. Prove the insufficiency, meaning prove two different answers are possible. And we're going to find out why I advocate for that very shortly. Okay. So we go to statement two and we have J, D, and B again. And here we know that Ben has not won an Oscar. So J is still an Oscar and B in this case is not. And here's the issue. If you do the doom logic, if you just say, well, now we don't know about Denzel, so insufficient. Well, you're going to miss this question. Before the GMAT even announced, by the way, before the GMAT announced that they were doing logic-based data sufficiency questions, I used this kind of question, not the exact wording, but a very similar setup, as the example of a perfect data sufficiency question. Because the concept is not particularly difficult. And in quant, the concepts are not always particularly difficult, but you can still make very hard questions that a lot of people miss if they don't use good habits. And this is, I think, the perfect example of this. Because if you just say, well, we don't know about Denzel, insufficient. Well, okay, prove insufficient, meaning prove two answers are actually possible. If you're watching the video, by the way, I want you to pause and try to do this. Pause the video and actually prove that two different answers are possible. For the sake of time tonight, I'm just going to keep going, though. Well, let's consider the possible cases. Well, maybe Denzel won an Oscar, so he has an O. Is the answer to the question yes or no? The answer to the question is yes. Someone with an Oscar is sitting next to someone without an Oscar, so the answer is yes. There's only one other possibility, and that's no. Maybe Denzel did not win an Oscar. Does that get you a different answer to the question? It does not. The answer to the question is still yes. Because now Jennifer, who has an Oscar, is next to Denzel, who does not. And so there's still someone with an Oscar sitting next to someone without an Oscar. The answer is still yes. And so statement two is actually sufficient. Even though we don't know about Denzel, we have one answer to the question that is asked. And that's also important. Why it's also important to really note the question that is asked. So, big tip for data sufficiency, actually go through the process and this is why you don't want to be too lazy about like, well, I don't technically have to answer the question, so why do all that work? You still want to get to possible answers of the question to make sure that you actually get to possible answers. Don't stop short. You're always going to have the same gut impulse that a lot of us probably had here, right? Now, statement one's not sufficient because we don't know about Ben. Statement two is not sufficient. We don't know about Denzel. That's a gut impulse. But the GMAT is very, very, very good at punishing gut impulses. Now, sometimes your gut impulses are right, as you know, over here, your gut impulse happened to be right that I don't know about Ben, insufficient. That gut impulse was correct. But then on the same problem in this, the next step, that same gut impulse is wrong. And the GMAT's going to punish that hard. You're never going to fix your gut impulses. It's an important thing to note. Everybody, for a moment, is going to think that statement 2 is insufficient. And I can't tell you how many times in data sufficiency I've thought a statement was sufficient because it just seemed insufficient. No way does that get me to a single answer. And then, but then I still, because I know how the test works, I still say, yeah, but let me actually prove that I get different answers because I know that's what I should do. And then when I do that, I realize, oh my God, there's a sneaky thing that actually makes the answer the same. And you got to be trained to actually go through the process to catch those moments. Okay, this is also a good example of a C trap. Which is an old data sufficiency trap to look out for. When the two, like, okay, hold up, you're just going to tell me Jennifer, you're just going to tell me Denzel, you're just going to tell me Ben. Of course, if I have the two together, I know everything. I know exactly who won an Oscar and I know exactly who didn't. So of course, the two together would be sufficient. That just seems a little too convenient, a little too nice and obvious. Vicky, these are not official GMAT questions. The difficulty on this one is high. This would be a very hard question. But notice it's not hard because of the concept. It's hard because you either do the process or you don't. And if you do the process, it's not hard. If you don't do the process, you're going to miss the question. And the GMAT is often about process. Now, let's go back to that mystery step 4 that I've ignored so much. I just showed you that you don't have to do the mystery step 4 to get the right answer here. But let's talk about that mystery step 4 in the pre-statement steps. And it's something that, again, has always applied to data sufficiency. We're just going to deal with it now. That mystery step 4 is rephrase or investigate. Sometimes it will help you out to do a little bit of work on the question stem before going to the answers. Now, there's a few ways to do that. In this case, you might recognize like there's not that many choices for D and B. They either won or they didn't. So either they all have an Oscar, or Denzel has one and Ben does not, or Denzel doesn't and Ben does, or Denzel does and Ben doesn't, or Denzel doesn't and Ben doesn't. There's really only 4 possible cases up front that are possible. And if you recognize like there's just not that many cases up front, write them out. Just write out the possible cases. There's only 4 here. And you'll realize pretty quickly, oh my gosh, there's only one situation where the answer is no. And that's if they all have an Oscar. If any other situation happens, the answer is yes. Someone with an Oscar is sitting next to someone without. And so just by laying out the possible cases and seeing what the answer is for those cases, you have a really good sense of what's going on in this question. And then as soon as you see Ben does not have an Oscar, you know the answer is yes, because if someone doesn't have an Oscar, the answer has to be yes. So when there's not that many cases, if you sense there's not that many cases up front, write them out. See what possible answers there are. Similarly, and related to this, there are also there are many things you can do in rephrasing and investigating, but here's 2 common useful rephrasing or investigate questions. One is what circumstances result in which answers? That's kind of what I just showed you by actually just going through the different circumstances and seeing what the answers would be. Another thing you can think about is what answers would require what circumstances. And so if this question is asking, did someone with an Oscar sit next to someone without an Oscar? You can think about, okay, what would it mean if the answer to that question is yes? Well, it means an O is next to an N. Okay, what if the answer to that question is no? If the answer to this question is no, if no one with an Oscar is sitting next to someone without an Oscar, you might sense that everyone has an Oscar. The only possible situation is oh. That's the only time the answer is yes. And so the rephrase becomes, did someone not have an Oscar? If someone doesn't have an Oscar, then the answer is yes. If everyone has an Oscar, the answer is no. And once you ask that question, it's really obvious. The statement work is obvious. Okay, does everyone have an Oscar? Statement one, Denzel has an Oscar. Okay, but Ben could or could not have an Oscar, so we get two different answers. Number two, does everyone have an Oscar? Ben does not have an Oscar. Oh, well, I haven't answered the question. We're good. Does everyone have an Oscar? No, Ben doesn't. Okay, that's sufficient. If you rephrase the question, you can often ask something a lot simpler. And that's really what this question is asking, is does everyone have an Oscar? It's just asked in kind of a silly way. But you get to that rephrase and you realize statement two, of course, tells you enough. Does someone not have an Oscar? Yeah, Ben doesn't. I have my answer. Okay. So look to rephrase and investigate to simpler questions. Okay. I feel like that's honestly the big lessons. I feel like I've kind of said all the big takeaways about how all these old processes and all these old habits, they really still apply. And that's why I always harped on the old GMAT that even when it was quant based, it often wasn't about the quant. It was always, this reasoning game was always happening underneath. So all the old strategies apply. So let's just do some more questions and put them into practice. Here's another one. Take 2 minutes. See where you fall. That is 2 minutes. If you have an answer, let's see what it is. Two C's and a few holdouts. Okay, so I move through this. Step one, what is given? I have 6 paintings and they're hung vertically. So I guess I could have written like A through F, maybe I should have done this instead of writing it, A through F, and they're vertical. I have a system, and this is from some LSAT work, that if you pick up our LSAT logic games book, it might help you actually with some of this GMAT stuff. A circle means that the numbers or the things can float around inside, and a rigid situate, like a rigid box, means that they are fixed in an order. So I don't know what the order is. I just know it's A through F from top to bottom. I want to know if C is in top. And I guess I should draw, if I'm going to draw the others. The other six, the other five, I don't really care what order they're in. I just want to know if C's on top. Statement 1 tells me that the only painting that is ever allowed to hang above C is E. And that is not sufficient, because it could be E on top with C beneath, or it could be C on top and the others here, and I don't know which. And so I know it's insufficient because I know C is first or second, but I don't know if it's first. So the answer, so statement 1 is not sufficient. I get rid of A and D. Statement 2 tells me F is number 2. So F is second from the top. Well, that's also not sufficient, because C could be on top or C could be beneath. And I don't, who cares what's above it? There's nothing that's going to preclude C from being on top or beneath. So statement 2 is not sufficient. I get rid of B. Now I take the two together, though. So now the two must be brought together. I know F is in the second position, and I know the only painting that is allowed to hang above C is E. Well, C could definitely be on top. I can put C on top. That's possible, and I don't know what everything else is here. And the answer in this case is yes, C is on top. Now the question is, can I put C below the top? But I have to keep following the rules. Remember, the rules must be followed. So F is still in the second position. And if I put C below F, it breaks statement 1's rule. Statement 1 says the only painting allowed to hang above C is E. Well, if I put C below F, F is above C. That's not allowed. So C must be on top. It's the only case that follows both rules. The answer to this question is C. Again, you're testing cases, and when a case breaks a rule, it just gets kicked out. You throw it away. Okay. So this is a good example where we have to, this is our first time where C is correct. In the first question, we brought the two together to test C or E. This time, C was actually sufficient. C must be on top. So someone is saying that, someone is in the chat has said that it seems like E always has to be above C. That's not what statement 1 says. Statement 1 doesn't say E has to hang above C. It says the only painting allowed to hang above C is E. The only painting allowed to hang above C is E. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean E has to hang above C. It says if there is a painting above C, it's E and nothing else. That doesn't mean that there has to be something above C. This means C is either on top or E is on top with C in second. Those are the only, and then I don't know about the other paintings here, but these are the only two cases allowed for those positions. Either C's on top or E's above C. But it doesn't say E is always above C. Okay. We're getting to the finer points of conditional logic, which, fear not, will be a discussion we're going to have. For now, let's keep practicing and moving onward and upward. Let's try this one here. This is one I just made up like 30 minutes ago. I'm gonna make sure, we'll see if it works. I don't know. Take 2 minutes. That is 2 minutes. I'm just going to spoil this one, gang. This one's a big one for rephrasing and investigating. If you don't do that on this one, you're going to be in trouble. On the one before, the Oscars and the actors, if you didn't rephrase or investigate, there were still some ways to kind of test cases and be okay. Here, you need to rephrase, investigate. And in general, the more crud up front, the more crud in the question stem, the more likely that rephrasing will be useful or necessary. So if you're working through the statements right now, I want you to choose an answer, because you have to choose answers sometimes on this test. I want you to choose an answer, choose a letter, and then I want you to forget the statements, and I want you to go, I'm just going to give you 2 more minutes to just work on the question stem and just see what you can get from the question stem. And if you're at home watching the recording, pause and do that as well. I want 2 extra minutes here. Forget the statements for a second. Just work on the question stem itself. All right, so if I'm doing this question, I have 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. 5 cruise ships, F, G, H, K, and M, are coming into a tourist destination. They will arrive one at a time at 11 a.m. or at 3 p.m. No ship arrives Tuesday morning. So if on my schedule, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, no one arrives Tuesday at 11 a.m. So that slot is out. There are 6 times possible. Okay. Tuesday at 11, though, is actually not. And F and M arrive on the same day. So I put them together. I know they're in a group. I don't know the order, but I know they're in a group. And I know H arrives before G. So I've written H to the left of G because it has to be to the left of G on this list. I want to know where K is. What day and time does K arrive? So that's a choose one question type. So notice again that I am doing scratch work here. You can't be doing this in your head. You have to have some systematized way of visualizing the problem. And in a long given like this is where you do it. Just find a way to visualize the information on your scratch work. And there'll be some patterns and some norms that you'll find. Statement. So sorry. The other thing I would say is this again. This rephrase, investigate thing. The recognition here that okay, FM have to arrive together, but they can't on Tuesday. Tuesday only has one slot available, so F and M can't arrive on Tuesday. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out the possibilities for when F and M can arrive. They could arrive Monday. And then I have this other thing to deal with, which is that H must be before G. Well, so if they arrive Monday and H arrives before G, maybe H arrives Tuesday afternoon, and then G and K are free to arrive sometime Wednesday. I don't know the order, but that would be one scenario. Or maybe F and M arrive Monday, and H arrives Wednesday morning, leaving G only to arrive Wednesday afternoon, because that's the only time that G can arrive, if it's going to arrive after H. In which case, K must arrive Wednesday morning. Now, as a GMAT thinker, I'm already curious about this because I have a fixed answer for K. In this scenario, I know where K is, and that's the question I'm asked. So I'm curious about that. Those are the only two possibilities for F and M arriving on Monday. Either H is before G on Tuesday, or H and G arrive on Wednesday and K is on Tuesday. The other possibility is that F and M arrive on Wednesday. I don't know the order, but in this case, excuse me. In this case, I could do H and G here. And K is here. Or I could do H and K on Monday and G on Wednesday. So there's really 4 scenarios to think about. And there are other ways, by the way, this isn't the only way of breaking this down. But I do think it's probably the most convenient, or one of the most convenient, to really think about, okay, this F and M chunk takes up a day. It's either Monday or Wednesday. What happens with the other constraints if H has to be before G? And so then I go through my statements, and now the statement work is actually going to be much easier. I'm probably not even going to have to write anything else. I'm just going to write my grid A, D, B, C, E. Statement 1 says F arrives on Monday. Well, okay, here's F arriving on Monday, and I already have it. K arrives at different times. I mean, heck, even in this first situation, F arrives on Monday and K could be Wednesday morning or Wednesday afternoon. So statement 1 is not sufficient. It's not A or D. Number 2 tells me ship H arrives on Wednesday. I don't know why I said the Wednesday, but it arrives on Wednesday. Well, if I look at my situations, there's only one case where ship H arrives on Wednesday, and that's here. And if ship H arrives on a Wednesday, K is Tuesday afternoon. And so statement 2 gives me enough information to answer the question. The answer here is B. This one would be very much a headache to do without a good rephrase up front, without building the scenarios before going to the statements and having some sort of system, right? Because you don't have to write out, like, one thing you might be noticing here, right? Like, I can't write out FM and MF and just make a new line each time. That's going to take too much time. Just recognize that M and F, they're interchangeable. So just put them in a block in a cloud and just know that they can switch. I could be MF or it could be FM. I don't know which, but they're in this Monday slot or they're in this Wednesday slot. And they can't be on Tuesday. Okay. Any questions about this one? Another pretty sneaky one, pretty tricky, but I think it's a good question. Let's do another here. Take 2 minutes for this one here. That is 2 minutes. 2.5, actually. So I have here 6 houses in a row made of brick, wood, or stone. I know the first house is brick. I know the last house is stone. I want to know what this fourth house is. That's the question. Here's what's given. Here's what's asked. Not much rephrasing or investigating to do on this one. I'd move to my statements. Number 1 tells me that the second house is made out of the same material as the fifth. Well, okay. Tells me that these two are the same, but that doesn't seem particularly useful to tell me what that fourth house is. So statement 1 is not sufficient. A and D are out. Statement 2 tells me that there's no 2 houses in a row made of the same material. So if I have my brick, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, I know that the fifth is, I know that this one is not brick, and I know this one is not stone, but I'm not sure what that middle one's going to be, that fourth one. No reason to say it's going to be wood, brick, or stone, because this fifth one could be brick, and then this could be wood, or it could be stone, quite frankly. There's just no telling. So statement 2 is out. Now I bring the 2 together, though. Now the second must be the same as the fifth, and I can't have consecutive things. So this one can't be brick. The second one can't be brick, so it'd be 2 bricks in a row. And this last one, or the fifth one, can't be stone because I can't have 2 stones in a row, which tells me that this must be wood. That second and that fifth house must be made of wood. Now, what is the fourth house? I still don't know. This could be brick or stone in either order. It can't be wood. but either one could be brick or stone, so I can't say that I have an answer. The answer is E. No, the two statements are not sufficient. But just a quick notice what happens if I change the question. If the question was, is the fourth house made of wood? And I go through this same process, now the two statements together are sufficient. So it's really important to know what the question asks. Because is the fourth house made of wood? No, not in this case. It can't be. It has to be brick or stone because this fifth house must be made of wood. The fourth house can't be made of wood because they can't be the same material. So noticing what the question is, you get different answers. Changing the question can change the answers. Seems obvious, but it's worth noting. Maybe be very sure you know what is asked. Oh my gosh, I have a few more. Okay. Oh, this one's fun. Take 2 minutes. Another tricky question. That is 2 minutes. That is 2:40. This is a pretty hard one, so I'm going to give you a little bit extra time. Now, these two statements should raise some alarms. It seems too easy to say, okay, one person chose white chocolate. James, Leon, and Matthias did not choose white chocolate. Well, then Karen chose white chocolate. C, right? Like, but that screams C trap. And it is a C trap. That's just too straightforward for what seems to be otherwise a pretty dang hard question. So you want to be very careful about C traps. We know that, okay, so each person selected two kinds of chocolate. We know Karen selected milk chocolate. And there's no two people can choose the same two. Each box must be different. Okay. Statement 1 tells me exactly one person in the group selected white chocolate. There's not a lot of rephrasing I can do, right? There's too many up front. It just seems like there's too many combinations to think about with the other people choosing chocolate, right? This doesn't really seem like a narrowed down quickly situation. So let's go to the statements. Only one person chose white chocolate. Well, testing cases guidance, your first case, throw out a first case. Don't think about it. And like make it really easy. So only one person chose white chocolate. Let's make it Karen. You don't have to, but let's just make it Karen. Now, I only have 3 chocolates for the other 3 people. Which you might notice is what happens in statement 2 anyway. So with 3 chocolates, and I can't make duplicates, okay, let's put milk and caramel for J, and milk and dark for Leon, and dark and caramel for Matthias. That's actually the only 3 choices there are. And this actually does get a little bit, it doesn't, it's not necessary, but there is a little bit of math that's helpful here, which is that with if you're choosing 2 things out of 3 options, there's only 3 ways to do that. Now, I don't know if this is actually right. I don't know that this is just a hypothetical case. I don't know that this is what J, L, and M chose. I also don't know if this is what K chose, but I can see here also, it's like, okay, so I have a case where the answer is W, right? Where Karen chose white chocolate for her other chocolate. But think back to what I talked about earlier. Can I tweak this case? Do I have to come up with a whole new case, or can I just kind of tweak it and get a different answer, but still follow the rules? I want you to think about that. Could I just barely tweak this case and get a different answer? Take 20 seconds and think about that. Why not just switch these 2? Or switch these 2? Either of those switches still follows the rules because there's only one W in the group. There's still no duplication because I'm just switching, right? These J and L and K all have milk chocolate. So whatever, let's just switch around who has dark and who has white and who has caramel. And that will be a different answer to the question. So statement 1 is not sufficient. I can get rid of A and D. But if you've done this, now statement 2, if you did this work, statement 2 is going to jump out a little bit more suspiciously to you because it says now that J, L, and M did not choose white chocolate. Well, that means that they only have the choice of the other 3, which, as we might already realize, is like, well, there's, okay, well, then it's, M and C and M and D and D and C. Now, I don't know if that's like, these are totally interchangeable with each other. I don't know which one chose D and C. I don't know which one chose D and M or which one chose C and M, but those are the only 3 groups for those 3 people. And now there's Karen, who has milk chocolate, and we want to know what her other pick is, and there's only one choice because I can't duplicate. If I do C, that matches the CM. If I do D, that chooses the DM. And I have to have M with something, and the only other choice is white chocolate. And so the answer here is B. Statement 2 is sufficient to answer this question. Karen had to choose W if the other 3 did not. Notice this is advanced, but it's helpful. Advanced, notice interchangeability. I've kind of hinted at it a few times, but this one I think is the most important one, right? J, L, and M are totally interchangeable. I don't really like, I don't fret too much about what they have. There's not a lot of restraints to what they have, except that they did not have white chocolate. So whatever, they're just three interchangeable entities that don't have W. Doesn't really matter what they had exactly. But since I know that about the three interchangeable entities, the one I care about, Karen, had to have white chocolate. So statement 2 is sufficient. All right. Home stretch. Can I answer any questions in the room? We have 2 more and then a kind of a bum list of things, but 2 more problems. This one, by the way, was quite hard. Try this one here, 2 minutes. Made a mistake. I'm going to change it real quick. Excuse me. That is 2 minutes. How'd we do? Yeah, I have a D, I have an A. We're approaching 2:45, so we don't want to go too much longer. I have another A. So what is given? I have the 6 friends. They're in this arrangement, 6 seats where A is in front of B. And I know Neil is somewhere in row A, and I want to know, did Tracy sit directly behind Elliot? So do I have Tracy directly behind Elliot in this arrangement? That is my question. Statement 1 tells me that Sarah sat between Howie and Miguel. So I have Howie and Miguel flanking Sarah, and that's either HSM or MSH. Now here's the key insight. If that's how they were arranged, and Neil was in the first row, then they must be in the back row. Which means I have N, T, and E in the front row. I don't know what order they're in. And I also don't, I know that H and M can switch. But here's what I definitely know. Tracy did not sit behind Elliot. And this is a yes, no question, right? Yes, no. Did Tracy sit behind Elliot? Yes, no. Well, the answer here is no. And just a reminder, this is also from the old GMAT. A firm no is sufficient. If you can say no to a yes, no question, that is an answer. And so if Tracy's not behind Elliot, definitely, then the answer is no. That is sufficient. You can say it's either A or D. I can get rid of B, C, and E for this one. Statement 2 tells me that Neil sits directly to Tracy's right. So I either have Neil to the right of Tracy this way. This is to the left. It actually won't matter if you mix this up, but since it's to Tracy's right, if they're facing the stage, Neil will be either here or here, or Neil will be in the middle and Tracy over here. But Neil is in the first row. And this tells me Tracy's in the first row because Tracy's to the right of Neil from the way we're facing, to the left of Neil from Neil's point of view. Doesn't really matter though. Either way, Tracy's in the front row, which means she's not behind Elliot. Because to be behind Elliot, she'd have to be in row B. But if she's next to Neil, she's not. She's in row A. So the answer to this question is D. Both statements are sufficient. They both tell me Tracy did not sit directly behind Elliot. Because the only possibilities are that she's in the front row with Neil. Okay, so the answer to that is D. Again, consider your possibilities, test your cases, and answer the question. Keep the question in mind. All right, last problem. We'll use it to kind of generate some flashcards and such. Take 2 minutes for this question here. Excuse me, gang. Let's hold up. I think I am missing something to this question. So let's pause. Two minutes from here. I think that gets what I wanted this one to do. That is 2 minutes. For the sake of time, I'm going to call it here. I have an A and a D. I'm going to change the phrasing here, although it does not change the logic. I'm going to say, but Margot, who only camps in the summer, does not go camping unless her friend goes as well. Yeah, same logic, same answer. So let's work through this one. This is a different animal. This question is using conditional logic, which casually you might know as if-then logic. And if you notice a question has a bunch of conditional logic, you're going to want to build conditional logic chains. We're going to specify, we're going to build some flashcards here in a moment. But before we do that, actually, let's do that now. Let's do that now. We're going to do that, and then we're going to come back to this question. There's a lot of ways to give if-then statements. We're going to phrase this as if A, then, or we're going to symbolize this as if A, then B. A arrow B, meaning if A happens, B happens. The simplest way to say that is if A, then B. But there are others. You could say A only if B. That one's a head scratcher. That took a long time for me to really grasp because it feels like, hold up, if A then B means this symbol, shouldn't A only if B mean this symbol? And the answer is no, it does not. If A then B and A only if B mean the exact same thing. The simplest way to remember this is that only if means then. If you see only if, just make it then. You can also say not A unless B. That means if you have A, if it's not A unless B, that means if you have A, you have to have B. If you have something like that, if B is not true, then A is not true. That means if A is true, B is true. All of these come out to if A, then B. The other kind of, there are probably many others, but those are some of the more common ones. The other symbol you might do is a two-way street. Oh, how about this? Every A is a B. That's another way to phrase if A, then B. If every A means B, or if every A results in B, it means if A, then B. If it's a two-way street, you might say A if and only if B, or B if and only if A. You might be told two different things. You might say if A, then B, and if B, then A. If you're told both of those, then it's a two-way street. You can say every A is a B and every B is an A. That means if A, then B is a two-way street. There are probably others, but again, these are the most common ones. And you want to know flashcards. You want to be able to say, okay, if I see this, I know it's this arrow. I know it means this thing. Signs of conditional logic. By the way, this should be really a full seminar. We'll do a full seminar at some point. I'm just going to give you a crash course for this problem and just to make these flashcards. But if, then, only, every, or all, not can be a sign of conditional logic, although it doesn't have to be. You see these words in a problem, you know you're going to be making a logic chain. Now, there are a few really important traps not to step into for this. If I have if A, then B, that is not the same thing as if B, then A, nor is it the same thing as if not A, not B. Those are fatal traps, and you don't want to step into those inferences. These are incorrect inferences from if A, then B. The only true inference from if A, then B is if not B, not A. If I know I don't have B, then I can't have A. Because if I have A, I have B, but I say I don't have B. That would lead to a contradiction. So if I don't have B, I don't have A. That's the only thing you can say. That's the only inference you can make from that logical statement. So if we take this to our question here, when it's not winter where she camps, then the temperature is hot. So I'm going to symbolize that as if not winter, then hot. And every time Jeanette goes camping, Margot goes with her, but Margot only camps in the summer. So if Margot camps, it's summer. If it's summer, it's not winter. And if Jeanette goes camping, Margot goes with her. So if Jeanette goes camping, Margot goes with her. If Margot goes with her, it's summer. If it's summer, it's not winter. And if it's not winter, it's hot. And I'm also told when Margot goes camping, Trisha goes with her. So I have two arrows for Margot that trigger. Now you can reverse this chain because if A, then B always means if not B, not A. And so I'm going to reverse this logic chain. I'm going to start at the end and say if it's not hot, then it is winter. That's the inverse of if it's not winter, it's hot. So if it's not hot, it's winter. If it's winter, it's not summer. If it's not summer, Margot's not camping. And if Margot's not camping, Jeanette is not camping. Now, what about Trisha here? Well, just because Margot's not camping doesn't mean Trisha isn't camping. I do know if Trisha's not camping, Margot's not camping, so I can draw that arrow. Trisha can camp without Margot, but Margot can't camp without Trisha. That's what this arrow means. If Margot's camping, Trisha's camping, that doesn't mean Trisha can't camp alone or with other friends. But if Trisha's not camping, then Margot isn't camping. So I have these two chains in my pre-work. Statement 1 tells me the temperature is cold where Jeanette goes camping. That means it's not hot. And if I chase that logic all the way through, if it's not hot, then we end up with Jeanette is not camping. Because if it's not hot, it's winter. If it's winter, it's not summer. If it's not summer, Margot's not going. And if Margot's not going, Jeanette's not going. So is Jeanette camping? Not in statement 1. That's sufficient. A no is sufficient. So I know it's A or D. Statement 2 tells me Trisha is camping. but that doesn't tell me anything. Just because Trisha's camping doesn't mean Margot's camping. Trisha could be camping alone. It could be winter or summer. We don't know about Trisha's preferences. So I don't know if Jeanette is camping or not. If it said Trisha was not camping, well, then Margot wouldn't be camping, and so Jeanette wouldn't be camping. But if Trisha is camping, I can't infer anything. It's the end of an inference chain. There's nothing it leads to. And I can't go backwards in this case because I've not said that every time Trisha camps, Margot camps, or that the only time Trisha camps is when Margot camps. I don't have a backwards arrow here. And so the answer to this question is A. That was a really gross crash course into conditional logic. I'm probably realizing that I should save that for a full other lesson because there's just so much there to dig into. But you got some crash courses and you got some flashcards to make from it, and you have a sense of how it works. But it can be very tricky, and it takes some getting used to. So that'll be a fuller lesson in a later date. By and large, though, I think we got some senses of how logic and data sufficiency works and how it is not drastically different from some of the habits and strategies we've learned before. It's just that this is often more about positioning and order and placement and grouping. And so you have to do some visualization of that often in the pre-work to know what you're going to know, what cases you're going to deal with. And we got several useful takeaways and big habits. Many of them are ones we've used before: test cases, rephrase, know your question type, specify that question, notice interchangeability, subtly tweak your cases instead of trying to generate whole new ones. Sufficient no is sufficient. I'm running a blank here, but there's a lot of good habits that carry over, even though it's not math. I'll stick around for any questions now. Otherwise, we hope to see you at some of these free options. We hope to see you at another free prep hour. We'll be holding these again once or twice a month, so keep an eye out for the next one. If you have any questions or concerns or any interested in our products, check out our link. Otherwise, have a wonderful week and best of luck in your studies. See you next time.